Welcome to Comic Book Savant. I'm your host, James Harris. In this video, I will be doing a review of Luke Cage Volume 1, Sins of Our Father trade paperback. And I'll be right back with that review after this. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant. I'm your host, James Harris. If you're unfamiliar with the show, from time to time, I'll take a video and do a quick review of a trade paperback that I recently read. Just coming off of Netflix release of season 2 of Luke Cage, I was more curious about the character and had an opportunity to pick up the most recent series from, I think it was 2017 to 2018. By Marvel Comics. That was Luke Cage. This first volume trade is called Sins of the Father. This is a trade paperback. It retails for about $15.99. It's written by David F. Walker. The artwork is done by Nelson Bleek II. The color work is done by Marcio Menez. And lettering is done by Joe Sambino, and this collects issues 1 through 5 of that said Luke Cage series. And this was a very interesting read. I don't know much personally about Luke Cage. Most of my history comes from the television show on Netflix and his involvement in the New Avengers during Brian Michael Bendis' run are primarily where a lot of my knowledge of Luke Cage comes from, which is very limited because this character has been around since the 70s, so I don't know much about his deep history. So again, coming off the second season of Luke Cage that I really enjoyed, that you could probably see here, I'll have a link to the review of season 2 right there if you haven't seen that review that I did yet. So I was more curious about getting some of the roots and the origins of the character, so I decided to pick this trade up and give it a read. And what I have to say about it is, I'm not too familiar with David F. Walker's writing. I've seen his name pop up before, but it was nothing that I could, pinpoint exactly what I read. The first couple of issues in the trade, probably like the first 2 issues, kind of slogged along, and it was a little bit hard to get through and to really keep me interested as a reader, but it ramped up slowly. And when it hit issue 3 through issue 5 in the trade, so that right at the middle point through the ending into the finale, the writing ramped up considerably, and I enjoyed the read overall. But it was a little rocky in the beginning, and it was kind of just like hard to get engaged in the characters in the world they were exposing to me. There was a lot of references to the back history of Luke Cage that I wasn't familiar with, and I felt like it didn't do a good job bringing someone that was unfamiliar with Luke Cage's origins into it so deeply, because it delved a lot into Dr. Bernstein that did the experiments that gave him his powers, which we saw briefly in season 1 of Luke Cage on Netflix, but I wasn't super familiar with him and other experiments that he did and other powered individuals that he made and all this kind of stuff that they really get into. And they didn't do the best job if you were a reader not knowing much about that history. They just really drop you in it. It steeps very heavily in it. But by the time you get to that midway point through to the end, they do a better job and you start to get a handle on the situation. Luke kind of gets dropped in, and as a reader, you get dropped in it with him. And as the story goes along, just like he's figuring out, they start shedding more light on stuff to make it better for the uninitiated to catch on and be able to enjoy the rest of the story. The artwork by Nelson Bleek II was pretty consistent throughout. His art style to me was a really throwback to a lot of kind of 90s image style artists, which it didn't bother me. I mean, it parts certain things as far as how characters were drawn reminded me of Liefeld, but he could draw feet and hands. And other image artists that you saw that worked on like Jim Lee books and Liefeld books during that time, it kind of like they had a house style. and it is reminiscent of what I saw in those books when I saw his artwork. But it didn't bother me in any way. It was relatively consistent throughout. It was certain pages you could tell that were kind of rushed towards the third and fourth issue here and there that really weren't as clean and as consistent as others. But all in all, the artwork didn't bother me at all. It was rather, I'm not going to say standard. It was average. I would say it was average at best. It wasn't bad, but average. All in all, I would just have to say that this book is meant for individuals that were kind of like me, coming into the situation where I was curious more about Luke Cage from the television show, and I wanted to know more about his roots in comics and his kind of story in the comic books. So that curiosity led me to read this. I think otherwise, if I didn't have that interest peak by coming off of season 2 of the show and wanted to know more, this is something I probably wouldn't have sought out, because Luke Cage is just one of those characters that they haven't done much with in a little bit, and they've done little mini series and different takes on the character over the years. But to me, his definitive run was always that Brian Michael Bendis' run on New Avengers. He really brought that character back up to the spotlight. He's been all over the place in the Marvel Universe kind of since then. So slowly but surely, I want to go get more acquainted with the character. Like I said, this was a decent starting off point. But I want to read some probably more later stuff, maybe even some of the 70s stuff, maybe some of the Power Man and Iron Fist things, certain books along those lines. But this is, like I said, this was fine as a starting off point. It's not going to be for everyone. But like I said, if you're not a heavy fan of Luke Cage or have heavy curiosity, this is a book you definitely could skip. If I would have to rate this, I would rate this about a 6 out of 10 on a 10-point scale. Which is normally on my rating scale is a wait for the trade. Since this is already a trade, it's pretty average. It's pretty standard. Like I said, this is not bad. It's not terrible, but it's not great. And it's not something that I would recommend to you to be like, you have to run out and get this and read this book. But if it's something that you have interest in, it's worth a pickup at the right price to read it. So that's my review. If you're unfamiliar with the channel and you like this review, definitely take a moment to subscribe. If you already have subscribed, click the bell notification down at the bottom so you'll be alerted when a new video drops. I drop new content on Tuesdays and Thursdays pretty consistently every week. But if you click that bell notification, if I drop any other videos, you'll be alerted as soon as they hit the channel. Also like, share, and subscribe as well. I also will have up here as well a link to the playlist of other trade paperback reviews I've done on the channel. I've done quite a few at this point. I try to get to at least one or two a month. So it's a fairly good amount of videos right now on trade paperbacks. So you can check that out also on the channel. That's all I have for you guys for this episode. I'm your host, James Harris, Comic Book Savant, and I will see you next time. Happy reading.